Title of this session is Winning the Cybersecurity War, Continuous Monitoring, Leveraging Intelligence Data, and Government-Wide Collaboration. Securing our cyber world is hands down one of the most critical issues that we are facing, and the complexities of such really can be significant. How to stay on top of the ever-changing technological advances, how to overcome cultural barriers, how to remain compliant with what oftentimes can seem to be endless amounts of mandates and policies, and that's just to name a few. We have gathered some of the forward-thinking federal officials here on this panel to lend their real-world perspectives on winning the cybersecurity war. The panel will be moderated by Bill Hartwell. He leads the federal and NATO area at Riverbed Technology. He is responsible for driving the company's solutions and services for IT performance platforms with very strong ROI and TCO for federal civilian agencies, the Department of Defense, and the intelligence community. So join me in welcoming Bill.
Good afternoon. Appreciate everybody's time and the opportunity to lead the panel here. I want to thank GTRA. Before I get started, I'd like each of the panel members just a quick couple of seconds about who they are and their background and their experiences, and then we'll get right into the meat of the topic. And you know, cybersecurity is obviously a very serious topic, and it's top of mind with a lot of agencies and departments today. We're going to try to have a little fun with it today, so that's not too serious. Of course, it is still Sunday. So, anyways, Vaughn, would you like to give us a quick start and work our way this way?
Sure. My name is Vaughn Noga. I'm the CTO and the Director for the Office of Technology Operations and Planning at the EPA. Within my area of observation, if you will, is everything network, endpoint computing, data center, security, computer security, incident response. That all falls underneath me. Largest challenges that we're going through day in and day out is obviously what we're here to talk about, and that's security. I would say that's probably one of the things that's top of the mind within EPA. One of the nice things about EPA, if you're familiar with the organization, is unlike some of the other agencies, and you're out there, we have 10 regions, but we're really centralized in how we approach security, how we approach the environment. So a lot of what we do has been centralized, from how we manage wide area networks. We have a wide area network within the EPA. Also how we manage computer security incident response. And then other things that we're doing relative to bringing some of those distributed capabilities together. Certainly budgets and the budget limitations have had a lot to do with that. One of the nice things about the EPA is in my 4.5 years there, we've actually spent a lot of time not only working on security, but also building relationships across the agency. And I think that's one of the areas that we've worked on quite a bit. And those relationships have allowed us to actually increase our ability to protect the agency and the agency's resources.
Great. Tom?
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Padagno. I'm the Enterprise Services and Operations Division Chief for the Coast Guard. I'm here representing the Coast Guard CIO. Like Vaughn was saying, much like the EPA, Coast Guard is a centralized IT infrastructure. I basically describe my job as the FiOS, or the Comcast Xfinity service provider for the Coast Guard. So I'll discuss a little bit more about our architecture during my time at the mic. Thanks.
Dana?
Yeah, Dana Malario. I work at NASA in the Office of the Chief Information Officer. I've been at NASA for over 20 years, and I've made a series of sucker moves. Several years ago, I was in an organization, the Automated Information Management Organization, which I guess was a precedent organization of the CIO's office, trying to implement, at that time, moving from mainframes to a client-server environment. And at that moment, it was a very frustrating time to move NASA forward. And the IG's office approached me and said, hey, you know, we've got an opportunity for you to make a difference. And I said, oh, yeah? Okay, I'll move over there. So I spent 8 years in the IG's office on the IT security side, critiquing NASA. And after a while, the agency CISO at that time said, hey, Dana, you know what? You've been pounding on us for 8 years. Why don't you come over here and try to help fix some of these things you've been bugging us about. And I said, oh, yeah, well, maybe I'll do that. And so I've been over in the CIO's office doing IT security ever since for the last 6 or so years. So I keep getting suckered into making these moves to try to make a difference. So I'm trying to see where the next one's coming. So,
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Last but not least, Benjamin.
Hi, my name is Ben Bergerson. I started my federal career 5 years ago. I thought I'd get a pin or something, and they said, no, you have to be here 10 or 20 years for that. I started as a Navy civilian security program manager for U.S. Antarctic program, protecting the science out there from nasty penguins who might break into our computers. And that was a lot of fun. It was very cool. I then moved to U.S. Commerce Department for the Inspector General Office, and I became the CIO there. Been there for about 3 years, and now finding out that cybersecurity is just one of 12 different things that a CIO has to think about, but it is the one that will get you. So it's always at the forefront.
Well put. Thank you. Actually, I wasn't worrying about penguins on the way up here. I was worried about rutting deer. So, and what they would do to my car if, in fact, there was a collision. So, you talk about internal threats. Anyways, we're going to have about 40 minutes where we're going to try to get some really good content out on challenges in continuous monitoring and collaboration, exchanging intelligence data, things like that. What I can assure you is that every one of us in this room probably has a different perspective. What might be important to the Coast Guard might be very different to the EPA and to any number of the agencies across the board. So we obviously can't boil the ocean here. We're going to probably have 4 major areas that we'll ask each of the panelists to talk a little bit about, and then hopefully we'll have 5 to 10 minutes for some Q&A, and then we'll wrap up, and we've got 50 minutes total. So I'm not going to talk very long because I'm not the expert on this topic. These 4 gentlemen know a lot more about this than I do. However, I want to open up with a couple of remarks just to give you a few things to think about, not only why they're talking, but maybe when you all move on today and over the next 2 days, think about some of these things because they are ever present and they are very important. One thing that I would say is when you're trying to lock down a network, protect and secure, how do you do that without significantly degrading the IT performance of that network and those assets, right? Because it has a payload that you're paying for, directly and indirectly. So keep that in mind, because that's a challenge for the folks that have to make those decisions in any organization. Another area that I would say is a challenge is, and we'll get into this today, but how do you develop a network-wide monitoring program that combats cyber attacks from every possible internal and external threat? That's a big, big task. Another thing that we think about a lot is what are some of the best practices with new and innovative approaches to network visibility, data analysis to achieve real-time, accurate, and advanced threat detection and incident response. The technologies have changed a lot in the last 3 to 5 years. What may seem to be great stuff back then maybe is very inadequate in the type of cyber attacks we're seeing today. And then last but not least, imagine the impact in your ability to provide a service to the citizens or to accomplish your mission if and when a cyber attack would significantly degrade internet and cell services, cloud resources, transportation services, financial systems and services, healthcare services, and last but not least, our nation's power grid. So think about all that because it's something that these folks and others are dealing with every day. So we're going to move forward into the first question. And again, we do have time for you for questions at the end. Okay. First question's to Ben. How do you define continuous monitoring with a proactive and detective security posture across a large and complex enterprise class network? And if you also could spend a little bit of time sharing with us, how does Department of Commerce tackle this challenge today in supporting the education information sharing surrounding this topic?
With the continuous and detective components, we do intrusion detection as well as network anomalies. What is your baseline for your environment, and what are the changes that are happening? So that's 24/7/365, and it's use automated systems as well as about 50% of human analysis to do that. That's how you can define continuous monitoring in one aspect. In another component, for compliance and documentation, you might be making weekly updates to your databases for authorization and accreditation, rolling into small quarterly updates, and then you've got a once a year renewal of your authorization to operate, assuming that there aren't any major changes. These, besides the continuous monitoring for intrusion detection, timelines are created individually in different departments. So it's up to you to decide what does continuous monitoring mean. But the days are long gone where a 3-year CNA package would constitute what you need to do for updates. Now it's a continuous risk management in small bite-sized chunks of what's going on in your environment, knowing what is the risks to your agency, and then taking more immediate action. So as long as you're operating in a more real-time environment and focusing less on the paperwork, you're going to have a more secure situation and agency. The way that Commerce is doing this, about 2 years ago, we started a balanced scorecard, which maps to the strategic business plan as well as the White House initiatives and the missions of the 12 bureaus. It was rolled out in a pilot. First, you collect the data and get people used to reporting, and then you start using the metrics. And we found out that we have all the technology that we need. We have all the computers and servers and technical skills and engineers and scientists. We needed to improve the business processes. So cybersecurity now is a business performance management initiative, not so much a technical one. And rolling out new policies, rolling out changes to your performance plans of your employees, updating the contracts to have specific SLAs to what it is you're going to do, how fast you need to change a system if you detect an anomaly, how fast you have to patch a system, and what is the visibility that you're going to have. We also worked on strategic hiring and promotions. So if you want to change the culture of your organization, what are the people that you need to help do that, as well as what are the training and education components that you can have. There are lots of technical courses out there in universities. What we need now is a business and technical hybrid person that can talk in both languages.
Great. Thank you very much. That was a great start. So kind of staying on the theme with control, protect, and secure, the next question is going to go out to Vaughn. And what should be the top priorities, phases, and components of a cybersecurity continuous monitoring plan? And also tell us about maybe some best practices and current and future plans for EPA.
Mm-hmm. So I'll talk about priorities first. Certainly one of the things that I've done within the agency, and it's one of my priorities, is budget priority. You can't run a program, you can't provide security to information systems without budget. It's one of the pieces of my budget that I don't touch. In fact, much to the pleasure of my security director who's sitting here, it's the one area with my budget that grows year on year. Because the threats are ever increasing, and we need to stay on top of that. Certainly, other areas, other priorities is not just the information systems monitoring, right? It's not just the stuff. It's also system development lifecycle. It's how do we actually engage the system owners, system developers before they actually field a system that's going to have problems. Not seeing anybody out there has fielded a system or knows about a system that's been fielded that's got security issues, but I'm sure it happens. We're not immune to it either. It's engaging that on the front end, but it's also going back and looking at those existing systems and inserting ourselves. One of the things that we did with an EPA about 2 years ago is we really divided out operations and assessment and authorization. Right, so we hired a CISO who works directly for the CIO. We've got a good relationship with that office, really looking at the whole spectrum of security. Certainly, other priorities, automation. We talked about automation. I'm not a big tools guy. I think we need to have tools in place, but I think we need to have the analytical horsepower behind the scenes to actually interpret those tools to help individuals make not only decisions on security events, but also help making risk-based decisions going forward. That's one of the things that we focused on with the EPA over the last 2 years, is really growing that segment of our program and actually bringing those the analytical horsepower, the human capital to come in and actually look at those tools, make determinations, and provide remediations. When I came to the EPA about 4.5 years ago, this was one of the areas that, and I've said it before, operational visibility is huge. Right? When things go bump in the night, who's there to see that it goes bump in the night, and what's being done when it happens? And that's really from a continuous monitoring perspective. That's where we focused. Now, I know that there's efforts in work to look at the Uber systems. How do we bring all these tools together? How do we get a single pane of glass? And that's not any different than what we're trying to do with an EPA. But we're trying to be very methodical about how we do it. How do we actually bring these tools in? How do we bring the data feeds in? What are the most important things? So I think when you look at phases and you look at components, certainly phasing is an interesting thing. Pick the right things. You can't take everything in one bite. You have to look at your environment. You have to look at what are your threat vectors. And you have to engineer for those threat vectors and prioritize those right away. I believe that we've done a good job, the EPA, of identifying threat vectors. One of the threat vectors for us is education. It sounds like a strange one, but within continuous monitoring, one of the priorities, one of the components is strong education. This is one of those areas that gets us, and I'm sure there's folks out here who get frustrated sometimes when their users get email and the users feel like they need to click on every email they get and execute every attachment within the email. So that for us is a growing area that we're looking at. Certainly within the EPA, we talked about some of the investments. Human capital is one of those. Like I said earlier, one of the nice things about working the EPA is we really have a strong community of engaged stakeholders, both at the senior management level all the way down to the practitioner, and also certainly within my organization. The nice thing about that and having good relationships is you're actually able to make enterprise decisions on stuff, right? What tools are we as an enterprise going to invest in and deploy across the enterprise? And we've made strategic decisions over the last 4 years to do that. Decisions about having a way to do patch management, a decision on how we're going to do logging and event management, a decision on how we're going to do remote access. Those have been enterprise-wide decisions. And fortunate for the EPA, we have that structure in place. The budget comes through the CIO and gets propagated out to the regions. But again, part of the culture is really looking at opportunities to consolidate and collaborate going out. And you also look at budget and budget constraints. One of the areas, and again, go back to priorities and phases and components, is really enlisting those strong IT, information technology, information security professionals in the agency to handle not just their local responsibilities, but but also to participate in the enterprise. How do we do this thing as the enterprise? And it's not just a solution that's born out of my office that I promulgate out and saying this is the one way we're going to do it. It's how do we engage in these conversations, architect a solution that's beneficial to everyone, and how do we look at the budgets and promulgate that out in the most effective way. Another one of the areas that for me, again, it goes back to tools. Don't let good be the enemy of great. I'm an 80 for the 20 guy, right? We could spend forever trying to find a 100% solution, and one would argue that the last 20% costs way too much, and the value of what you got out of that 20% was very, very low. So we look at opportunities with that in mind. How do we actually get these tools, technologies, and these resources out there without taking so long to actually field a solution? And then I talked the last area from a component is the user education and training and awareness. We have, probably like everyone else has, we have yearly education programs. I'm sure some folks have incorporated that and do it more frequently. I would say this is a growing area for us. We know you cannot just train once a year and expect that a user is going to remember that 9 months, 10 months, 11 months later, right? So this is one of the areas that we're looking at from continuous monitoring, is to be able to start fielding education, training, awareness that's more real, right? It really brings the end user into and gives them an understanding of the threats that are out there. So with that?
Yeah, fantastic. Interesting, some of the comments talking about an enterprise, talking about business analytics, things like that. It's not always things that we hear frequently in the government, but it's definitely, I think, top of mind of a lot of people in this room. Okay, let's move over to Dana, and here's Dana's question. How does NASA protect mission-critical data and information while you collaborate with other governments as well as external resources around the globe? And also, can you share with us a few best practices and examples that have expanded your mission and your reach at NASA?
Sure. I was going to take a minute to try to, a couple of other people explained some of their operating environments, so I was going to explain a little bit about our operating environment. First of all, a lot of our mission is to share information, which right off the bat makes it extremely difficult as a security professional to work in that environment. So NASA shares a lot of their information. Their inherent mission is to share information, so everybody is all about sharing information. And within the NASA environment, we basically have 3 different types of networks. We have an institutional network, we have mission networks, and then we have research and development networks. Our infrastructure is spread across the United States and across actually the globe. We have 11 field centers. We have small component facilities all around the United States. We're connected with universities, and we have international partners. So really our presence is worldwide. Again, that is a huge challenge for a security professional to try to get your arms around that network space and that space that has information flowing all the time. And on top of that, we literally have every operating system still running at NASA. I mean, we don't stop operating systems. I mean, people, missions build a mission based on an operating system, and the mission's still running. It's been running for 20 years. It's still out there somewhere in the universe. It was a one-off thing. It's built based on DOS, who knows what, and it's still going. And so that still has to be protected or somehow wavered out. And nonetheless, it's still there, and it's still in our environment, and we need to figure out what to do with it. So it's a very challenging environment for us to protect. And so given that, we're always struggling with how to let the mission continue to be, let NASA continue to be what it is, and protect itself almost from itself. The previous CISO, Jerry Davis, and I wrote a white paper titled Operating in a Compromised Environment, where we just assumed that our environment was compromised simply because of advanced persistent threat and various things that we had seen, we just kind of said, you know what, we're just going to, it's a given that our environment's compromised somewhere. We've seen attacks and we've seen things, so we're just going to baseline give the assumption that our operating system, our environment is compromised to some extent. So then what do we do from that? So we need to take a risk-based approach where we need to examine what are the most critical pieces of information that we therefore need to protect. And put protections around that information. What's the mission critical information? What are mission critical assets that we have? And figure out how we can protect those. We can't protect everything, but we need to figure out how to protect the most important information that we have and the most critical assets that we have, and then try to build out from that. And even that is a big challenge. As we have to bounce up against directives that we sometimes get to protect everything, we have to, we'll focus on what we want to protect or what we feel we need to protect against what, we're supposed to protect everything. So it's kind of, it's this push and pull that we have to work against. So one of the things, or one of the best practices that we've done is we've looked at avenues of attack. What are the big avenues of attack, and most of those come from emails. People come in, they click on links. You talked about that. The literally unpatched systems. Patches that haven't been put in place for one reason or another. Somebody waived something out that shouldn't have been waived out. That there weren't compensating controls put around that system. And then one of the bigger attack vectors that we have are websites. NASA has around 5,000 public-facing websites. That's huge, and that's just huge to put your arms around. So rather than going to every owner of that website, what we've chosen to do is we have implemented a web application security program where we scan that space and we look for vulnerabilities in the web applications, and we report those vulnerabilities back to the web managers. And we've had a lot of success with that program. Again, it's not something where we're going to every application owner, every site owner to begin with, because that's a Herculean task. I mean, we just simply don't have the resources to do that. But we're able to rank the vulnerabilities that we find, whether they're critical, high, and on down, and then we just start tackling the critical vulnerabilities and the high vulnerabilities, and we work our way down these lists so that we're able to then, hit that presence and try to tackle, where we find ourselves the most vulnerable. So that's pretty much how we do that, and we collaborate also with external agencies where they also see our vulnerabilities, whether that's the intelligence, usually it's the intelligence agencies where they let us know where they see vulnerabilities in our infrastructure, and then we go in and we tackle those. So that's just kind of a risk-based approach that we take to try to secure this very large presence that we have across the globe.
Great, thank you. So moving on here, Coast Guard is, we were talking about earlier with Tom, they have some missions that they've provided for a long time, but they're being asked to do a lot more, and it's usually around saving lives, but they're also getting into law enforcement and homeland defense as well. So they have challenges that maybe not everybody deals with on a day-in, day-out basis. So the question to Tom is, where are the threats coming from, and how is the Coast Guard dealing with an ever-changing and challenging mission today? Also, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the impact of Homeland Security mandates, mobility, and the challenges in dealing with that in your environment, and real-time collaboration for intelligence data and sharing. Have the Coast Guard, how does that impact your performance and your mission success?
Thank you. Yeah, a little bit about the Coast Guard architecture first, just again so you can understand where we're coming from. Coast Guard consists of about 58,000 people distributed around the nation, around the world. most of the time in pockets of 15, 20 people. We've got about 1,500 units across the Coast Guard and about 250 ships worldwide, operating worldwide, that we need to provide data and connectivity to. As he alluded to, we are one of 22 components within the Department of Homeland Security. They are our parent organization, and we do take direction from them. However, we are a military organization. We operate in the .mil environment, and we adhere to DoD policy, IT policy primarily. We get a lot of services from the DoD that we need: weapons, ammunition, charts, etc., healthcare. So we need to be able to stay connected to them. So that creates quite a bit of a challenge. From an architectural point of view, we provide a wide area network, much like EPA was describing. We maintain that and control it. We control the Active Directory architecture from my organization. I have an Information Technology Operations Center where we do 24/7 monitoring of that. Coast Guard is in the process of establishing a Coast Guard Cyber Command. It is in its early stages. It's in its infancy stages at this point, still pre-commissioning. So we're still trying to figure out what roles that's going to play. Currently, it's looking at CND, Computer Network Defense, but it's also looking at more of a nationwide mission. How do we work with our port partners? How do we work with Maersk and some of the other major shipping companies to make sure that their systems are secure and they can continue to move the enterprise, the commerce of the United States across the maritime domain? So with that, that's our, we've got a standard server infrastructure, we've got a standard workstation build. We don't allow our users to save anything to the local workstation. Everything's saved on file print servers centrally. So where are our threats? Our threats, obviously, being in the military organization, they are external threats. A lot of the same threats that you're seeing: phishers, hackers. We, being a military organization, do see a lot of state actors trying to get into our networks. They get into us, they can get in. We are part of the larger DoD environment, so if they get into us, the thought is they can get into a Navy, get into Air Force, get into DoD environments. So those are our external threats. However, like with most of you, I would suspect they're transmitted or introduced to into your environment by internal actors, by your end users, by the person that feels they need to click on every link in every email. Most of the time it's naivety. They don't know what they're doing. That goes back to Vaughn's comments about education. Got to better train the end user to what those risks are out there. Sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes they're just bad actors brought in as spies, don't care about the security clearances and are trying to make a little bit of money. Sometimes you've got disgruntled employees. Everybody's got employees that aren't happy with their work or getting ready to be fired, whether they're active duty military, civil servant, or a contractor working in your office. We all got to deal with those. So those are the threats that we're facing. Primarily. And I basically going to echo everything that you've heard here from the other three panelists. We've got to just continue due diligence, keeping the patches up, maintaining access controls, making sure we know who's coming onto our network. It makes it easier, a little bit easier for us within the department because we are military, using the DoD PKI and the CAC, the Common Access Cards, allows us to do some things there. Talked about, or the question about security mandates. Like I said, because we are a DHS component, we do have to answer to the secretary, to the DHS secretary, to Mr. Spires, the DHS CIO, and make sure that we're meeting their mandates. But at the same time, we are a military organization operating in the .mil environment, so we have to make sure that we're meeting all the DoD requirements, meeting all the DoD STIGs, and that we can continue to stay connected to the NIPRNet and to the CIPRNet. Does present some challenges to my CAO. Admiral Day goes to lots of meetings on the DHS side, and then lots more meetings on the DoD side. Don't envy his position. But we've got a pretty good working relationship with both CIOs, and we've basically come to the agreement that by default, we're going to follow DoD policy. We're going to adhere to their rules, adhere to their STIGs. At times, though, when we do identify a conflict between DHS and DoD regulations, we're going to choose whichever is the most strict, whichever provides the best security to our network, figuring the other guy couldn't really complain too much if that's our posture. Makes it challenging for people like myself who have to figure out and interpret these rules and figure out how to employ them. Makes it even more challenging to our end users who can't do things like use USB drives or plug their smartphones into their PC at work, so even just to charge them. For example, we adhere to DoD's mandates against USB, so that's an example there. We use their host-based security system that they regulate, they mandated out through task orders out of the U.S. Cyber Command. So that's a lot of our challenges there. The other challenge we have, you asked about mobility and SATCOM challenges. Our 250 ships at sea, keeping them part of the IT infrastructure, keeping them part of the Active Directory domain, making sure that they're continuing to stay patched at sea, that they got the latest antivirus definitions, and that we can manage their systems without choking their pipes, without choking the network, so that they can still continue to do operational, the mission at sea of saving lives and enforcing laws. We work with the companies, we work with the vendors, we throttle information as much as we can, and we make it work.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think mobility, wireless, thank you, and even satellite versus terrestrial type telecommunications bring in a whole set of challenges when you think about how you lock down data and secure it and protect it. And you know, sometimes when I'm spending time in this arena, mobility and telework mean different things depending on the agency's mission or the service they provide. So I think that's going to continue to be an ever-growing concern and challenge as everybody wants to have all those applications at your fingertips to your smartphone or your tablet every day, and it's growing exponentially. So we won't be able to avoid that. There's no way around it. Okay, so I think what we ought to do right now, since we have probably about 8 to 10 minutes left, is why don't we go ahead and open it up for some questions. And we'll take one at a time. We'd like you to do it through the microphone so that everybody can hear the question the first chance. And then what we'll do is we'll decide which one of the panelists is going to tackle the question. Okay? Who would like to start?
Sure. My name is Eric Avaki, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And great points today, guys. I heard a lot talked about, strong education and awareness. I heard a lot of issues spoken about, the issues with phishing. I think everybody's really having those issues in their organizations. I guess my question is, what do you do? Is there any follow-up when a user or when your users do not follow the best practices and they do make those mistakes? I heard that you guys have annual training. Do you have any other programs or intermediate programs for users that do make those mistakes? Do they retake the training, or do they do other types of training?
Great question. Vaughn, you want to tackle that first? You notice I didn't even hesitate.
Thanks.
Okay.
So that's the one thing that we struggle with is how much is enough and how much is way over the top, and it's just one of the things that again we struggle with repeatedly. If you're in a culture like DoD, where you're one and done, they take security violations very seriously. Not saying that EPA we don't. We do take them seriously, but the culture it's not the same culture. So one of the things that really several of us have sat down and started brainstorming, what's a more effective way to start bringing training to the population, to the EPA employees. The once a year, that is a requirement, but it certainly doesn't stop there. We recognize that there needs to be more training, more practical training, right? The practical training is things like sending something out to an individual and seeing if they respond to it, or individuals, right? And taking that opportunity as a learning opportunity and going back to them and sharing with them, what they did right or what they didn't do right relative to responding to something like a phishing attempt. We've done that, and that's, again, I think one of the things that we're thinking about is broadening that out to the larger population. But it takes a concerted and collaborative effort, not just within my shop, but also within the senior agency officials as well, because there's a natural tension there, especially in an organization that's got strong unions and things like that. You have to be sensitive about what types of actions and training that you actually do to the population. But again, security awareness and training is one of the largest areas. I think it's one of the largest opportunities that we have within the EPA to really affect and drive change within the culture. I'm sure that other organizations, and certainly NASA's the same way, there's a natural tension between open and transparent and security, right? We want to be open and transparent. Our employees want to be open and transparent. They use these devices, these tools at home in their private life, and they don't understand about the security, why they can't use their own personal device to conduct agency business. Again, I think the way that we attack that is through user education and training, and it's not by saying you can't. I think the days of saying you can't use that device are long gone. We've got to embrace that, And again, things that we're looking at is protect the information and train the individual, as opposed to looking at the device.
I was going to add, we have the same problem with users obviously clicking on the most ridiculously obvious phishing attempts. It's like, really?
Like the free iPads, right?
Yeah, you thought that was legitimate. And so we would tackle it with more training and more, on and on and on. And we always, because they would continue to click on these, we thought, well, what are we doing wrong? Why isn't our training very effective? Until one of our offices, I won't implicate them, came out with like some sort of a public service announcement, and they used a third-party vendor to deliver this announcement. And so it didn't come from, at nasa.gov, it came from something else. And all of a sudden, our help desk was just flooded with, should I click on this? This doesn't look right. And it completely undermined their efforts to send out this public service announcement. And then we thought, wow, well, maybe our training actually does work. So, you can't help some people, but it seemed like the majority of the people were kind of starting to get it. So,
all right, great, well said. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. We have another question.
Good afternoon, Ken Novolino from Excellion. Wanted to kind of ask how mobility efforts within these different organizations are changing the way you're viewing your security policies, or how you're doing business, how that's being changed by different mobility efforts.
Tom, you want to tackle that one?
I can address it from the Coast Guard perspective. Absolutely, we are getting, we originally started out with a mandate against iPads and smartphones and tablets. Couldn't really go very far with it. Like Vaughn was saying, we have to embrace the technology. We have to be able to use it. We did discover we actually did get out in front of DoD with our smartphone technology, which they didn't like very much. And our CIO did get called to the carpet on that. So we had to come back a little bit. But we are getting smarter with it, actually working with the DISA, working with U.S. Cybercom to develop the STIGs, to develop the guidance, using our subject matter experts to help them say, these are the security tools we can put in, working with the vendors. The primary service provider that we're using for mobility is Good. We've gone with GoodLink technology within the Coast Guard architecture, and so they're playing ball with us to provide a sandboxed environment within these devices. We know these endpoint devices are going to be hacked. There's going to be viruses, there's going to be agents on them to capture the data. So we got to try to build a sandbox within them, and right now Good has been the way. So we are working with, right now we have a pilot program going with our aviation community. They want to put a flight bag on an iPad. So we're going that route. We have our medical community wants to be using iPads within the clinics. So we're helping them with that. But we're proceeding slowly. We're trying to make sure we can address the security and also not upset DISA at the same time.
Well said. And I think some of you may be familiar with things like FIPS and common criteria and security validations like JITC and others. So those aren't going away, I don't believe, anytime soon.
Absolutely.
And if you're a vendor who's trying to provide technology back into these customers that care about that, I would strongly recommend that you get that into your funding and your budgets if you want to do business with these customers, because I think it's taking on a whole new area of importance. And again, that's not changing anytime soon. Do we have time for one more question? We don't.
Unfortunately, we do
please.
not. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
It's so important that we stay on track with time, so forgive me. We are taking a very quick break. We'll give you about 10 minutes. We're reconvening in here for our next keynote. Thank you all.